Well, tonight, the conclusion of our special series, Cities on Fire, which dives into the massive spikes in crime and declines in quality of life in America's greatest cities. And tonight we focus right here on New York City. Our correspondent Mike Carter with more on what is rotten in the Big Apple.
New York City and its police department saw a bewildering contradiction unfold in 2020 when it came to crime. According to the NYPD, while the city witnessed an historic overall low in crime last year, it was met by a 97% jump in shootings and a 45% increase in murders from 2019. So just why exactly is violent crime skyrocketing in New York? And what, if anything, can be done about it? Judith Thomas knows a lot about crime in New York. In fact, she used to report on it.
A Jersey City man, Frank Garcia, has been arrested
and I had a fascination for it. I wanted to know, why do people do the terrible things they do?
It's a question Thomas is still asking after being attacked on the street this past Easter while visiting her sister in Harlem.
And I walked by this guy, and I looked at him, and as I walked by him, he sucker punched me. He delivered me a hellacious punch.
Judith Thomas is just one of the thousands of people whose lives have been affected by New York's recent spike in violent crime.
It just angered me.
But former NYPD officer and 2021 mayoral candidate Bill Pepitone says it's the revocation of qualified immunity that has him most concerned.
Police officers don't know what they can do. Right now, they can't effect the arrest of a non-compliant subject without fear of losing their job or even being indicted.
Pepitone worries that as New York begins to reopen this summer, criminals will take advantage of a hampered police force.
We're going to go into a summer right now where the criminals smell blood in the water and they're going to react.
Curtis Sliwa remembers what neighborhoods like Times Square looked like the last time the city let violent crime go unchecked.
A seething cesspool of criminal activity.
More than 40 years ago, Sliwa founded the Guardian Angels, a group that aimed to stop violent crime in New York City's subways. He says New York's bail reform has crippled the NYPD.
There's almost no crime you can commit where you're not caught and then released. You could do a drive-by shooting of nuns praying in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and you'll be out in less than 12 hours.
Sliwa says thanks to policies put in place under Rudy Giuliani, New York became the safest big city in America. He says the city should recommit itself to enabling cops, not disabling them.
If you don't want the police, you don't want to call 911, what's the substitute? And the substitute is anarchy.
The city's violent crime measures reflect prison reform measures under both Governor Andrew Cuomo and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. With both Democrats advocating for criminals, the question remains, who is advocating for the victims? For Newsmax, Mike Carter, New York.
It's interesting stuff. NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea says that since 2019, New York State's prison population has dropped by 29%. New York City's jail population down an additional 28%. According to him, we have all seen the consequences of that. I couldn't agree more. For more on this, we're going to bring in former New York Governor George Pataki and former New York Congressman Peter King. Gentlemen, good to see you both.
Thank you.
Former Governor Pataki, what do you imagine the mindset is of the liberals that push for these policies in these big American cities, even though they see the consequences?
That's exactly what it is. I had to put up with it when I was governor, and that is that the violent criminal is a victim of society. And we have to understand that they are victims and we have to help them. I had a very different philosophy. They were violent criminals. They deserved to be arrested, convicted, and put behind bars. And they were. And we went from being the most dangerous state in America to one of the safest states in America. And now you have a complete reversal under the leftists in Albany and City Hall, that criminals are victims. We're going to let them out on the street. And the consequence is skyrocketing violent crime and a decline in quality of life. It's just hideous to watch.
It certainly is. Congressman King, we're seeing a rash of hate crimes in the city. We think a lot of it has to do with COVID, particularly against Asian Americans. An Asian woman was hit on the head with a hammer over the weekend in Times Square, which used to be one of the safest places in the city with all the cameras. The NYPD has released this video of a man being brutally beaten in another part of New York City, in Brooklyn. We see this every time liberals take control. And yet people still do not learn to not vote this way. And that's what just fascinates me. You watch as you get a liberal mayor come in into a city like this, and everything devolves, and we don't learn. Why don't we learn?
We have a liberal mayor, a liberal governor, And, I just wish we had George Pataki back in Albany. I mean, what's happening now is, like, for instance, last summer, when we had terrible riots in Brooklyn and Manhattan, you had cops being hit with bricks. You had Molotov cocktails being thrown at them. And then you had Governor Cuomo say that he was proud to stand with the protesters, which he meant the rioters. And to have that level of animosity toward the police, where the cops are always being blamed first, where they are so concerned that if they make a proper arrest, but there's a complaint filed, or there's some witness who has a video of a very isolated part of the whole encounter, he can lose his job, his pension, he can be indicted. So the cops have lost faith in their mayor, in their governor, and also the media piles on. So it's a terrible situation, and every excuse is made. For instance, it's blamed on white supremacy. And I'll bring this issue up. Almost all of the crimes against Asians are not even carried out by whites, and that's the reality. And yet there's this whole narrative out there that the police are anti-African American, that the police are anti-minority, that the police are the cause of all these issues. Right. Until this came about, until this last year where everything got out of control with the so-called bail reform and the riots and the demonstrations, the police in New York City have made it the safest city in the country. But now that's all gone.
Yeah, and it's all manufactured idiocy that people buy into because the media carries the line for the Democrats. It really is it's so gross to watch. Former Governor Pataki, some 3,500 NYPD officers have retired since last year. 3,500. Last week, a crime scene detective was, 5,300. Last week, a crime scene detective was attacked in broad daylight. You just saw the video there. He's doing his job, the middle of the city, broad daylight, gets smacked in the head with some kind of a stick. We watched the riots last year. We've seen this get worse and worse from the great years of Giuliani and Bloomberg. Has it gotten bad enough at this point for New Yorkers to vote for change? Or do you think it has to get worse?
Well, I sure hope it doesn't get worse. But I think you just saw that attack on a police officer, and it happens way too often. And think about, and you had the statistics about the retirement or resignation of police officers. Police officers today, if they go out and arrest a criminal that they see committing a crime, they arrest them at that time. The criminal will be back out on the street in a couple of hours, and the police officer will run the risk of being suspended, lose his job, have his pension taken away. So the police officers too often just say, what's the point of this job? So they resign, they retire, and we're losing very good people. It's just a horrible thing to say, and I hope it doesn't have to get any worse before we change the leadership. Yeah. How many more people are going to have to be victimized by these violent thugs that are out on the street before people see the light and change the way? And you were asking earlier, why does this happen? I'll tell you why it happens. Because we are victims of our own success. Republicans get elected. We stop crime. The streets become safe. People feel comfortable. So then crime goes away as an issue, and people forget about it. Well, crime has no longer gone away as an issue. It's now on the front pages, and it should be on the front pages. So hopefully the voters will take a look and say, the Democrats have no sense of what is happening out there on the streets. Let's give the Republicans a chance to straighten it out one more time.
Yeah, well, very well said on that. I couldn't agree more. People forget the reality of a situation, what a city can turn into if you're not careful with it. Finally, former Congressman King, today was the wake for NYPD officer Anastasios Sakos, who was hit and killed while directing traffic in Queens. He was actually killed by a drunk BLM activist who had just finished saying some very horrible things about cops. And I understand you attended today. Tell us about that.
I was at the wake. There's a tremendous turnout, a tremendous outpouring, and it's so disgraceful. I mean, this is a case, if this were the other way around, I mean, here you have a NYPD officer directing traffic in the middle of a fatal accident that was occurring, and this woman who had just finished a podcast, a racist anti-cop podcast about killing cops, ran into him, knocked him 170 feet, severed his leg, killed him instantly, and he now lies in a coffin. And there's virtually nothing about this in the media. If this was the other way around and some white supremacists had run over a Black Lives Matter leader, it would be the lead story all over the country. This is buried somewhere. And it was tragic. And to see the cops out there tonight with so many police officers, and also to see his family, he was a Greek immigrant, his family came over from Greece, it was terrible. And yet it's buried somewhere in the back of the papers. The New York Times would die, I think, before they even had to give much coverage to the story at all. But certainly to tell all the ramifications of the story.
Yeah, it's because our media is an embarrassment, and we certainly know that here. Former New York Governor George Pataki and former New York Congressman Peter King. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. Good to see you both.
Thank you. Good seeing you, George.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay well, Peter.
Thank you both, guys.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, where real news for real people.